Media Monday, time to talk to one of our regular media commentators who's been away overseas, author as well of the book Snouts in the Trough. Welcome back, Adam Schwab. Hi, Adam, how are you?
Good, Janine, yourself?
I'm good, thank you. Now, you've been away. Firstly, tell us about Europe. How's it looking? You spent a lot of time over there.
Europe's always a strange one. You walk down Oxford Street in London and it's a thriving throng of people. Literally, you can't walk down the street. But then you look at other parts of England and and especially Ireland, more so, and it's desolate and the economy is in almost ruin. And you hear of people just desperately seeking jobs. In Ireland, there's people who have been out of work for a year and would do literally anything, but there just aren't any jobs there. So it's really a tale of almost two economies, a bit like Australia in a sense. And
are you confident on Greece, for example? I mean, did you get the feeling, I mean, we're reacting, as we heard today, our markets aren't even reacting to Wall Street, they're reacting to Europe. And, you know, there were some dreadful photos at the weekend of somebody trying to burn himself, civil unrest. Are they as worried over there? I mean, have we every right to be as concerned here, so far away?
Well, it depends what you mean. I think almost the majority of people now expect a Greek default. I don't think it certainly will be a surprise when it happens, and this certainly isn't the first time Greece has defaulted. And there's been even in the last decade we've seen Russia default, we've seen Argentina default. So sovereigns defaulting on debt is hardly an unusual occurrence. Obviously, a Eurozone nation defaulting is a different event, but this is almost the first nail in the Euro's coffin, which will be shutting soon. But I didn't go to Greece myself, but the feeling I've picked up is that the Greek default's inevitable, and that the market's almost readying itself for it, as what's occurred over the past weekend with the liquidity being made available to European banks.
Now, you've been writing on other things, for example, property bubbles, both here and in China. Let's start about your recent article on China. What's your concern there, given that all hope here rests in China?
I think I mentioned last year on the show, Janine, that so many Australians just put their entire faith in China, and it won't stop growing, and what a great economy it is. And I've always been sceptical. I think Jim Chanos, one of the most respected short sellers in the world, said China was on a treadmill to hell, and his views tend to carry a fair bit of weight. And you look at China, and they've had enormous levels of inflation, enormous amounts of monetary easing, because they have a US dollar peg. When the US is printing money, effectively so is China. A lot of that money's found its way into the Chinese banking system and local governments who have extended billions and billions of dollars of loans to property developers and created these ghost cities in China, which are now laying largely dormant. Combine that with what is expected to be 25 square feet of office space for every man, woman and child in China, and you've got this ginormous boom that hasn't really been underpinned by fundamentals. And speaking to local Chinese and local Beijing residents, and they've been dealing with massive inflationary problems. The price of pork, which is China's main food staple, has been skyrocketing. Just the general price in China, I found more expensive than London, which I think would surprise many. Given the GDP in China is about 5,000 per annum per person. You
raise serious concerns that we're ignoring this bubble and the impact. I mean, what's the worst that can happen?
Well, obviously China's a different country to Australia, but if you look at the level of exports coal, iron ore, many of Australia's largest exports go via China, and that effectively feeds through our tax receipts and will lead to an unbalanced budget, would be the first ramification that we can see. Obviously Chinese also buy a lot of Australian assets, and I've obviously regularly talked about the housing bubble in Australia, and Chinese money is partly funding that, although, well, the looks of it, even Chinese money isn't enough to keep the bubble inflated. But there certainly is effects on Australia, and the notion that Australia is immune from any sort of economic downfall that we've seen in the US and seen in Europe, I'd say I'd be very suspicious of.
When do you think we would see, I mean, when you're talking about this bubble in Chinese property, I mean, is this a long-term problem that will take a while, or like any bubble, could it explode? I mean, how will we see it pan itself out, in what time frame?
I think I've always been a big fan of Steve Keane, but I think the one mistake he ever made was putting a time frame on his bet with Rory Robertson, because Steve will be proven right, but unfortunately had to walk to Kosciuszko because he got his timing Obviously, it was a two-pronged bet, and Steve will win part two. But I would never put a time frame on an asset bubble, especially an asset bubble like property, because if you look in the US, people were calling property being overpriced in 03, 04, 05. If you look at guys like Steve Burry, Michael Burry, Steve Eisner, some of the guys who made hundreds of millions from the US bubble popping, were about 2 or 3 years early.
Adam, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to stop you there and come back to you in a minute. We've got an interview waiting in Canberra. There's been a bit of mucking around tonight.
Okay.
You've just been talking about the Chinese property bubble. I just wanted you to finish up because you've also been writing very authoritatively on the Australian property bubble. Tell us what you think's happening there.
I think we're starting to see, well, what's the beginning of a deflation of the property bubble. We've had, look, it appears from most data that around April, May last year, prices seemed to peak in most capital cities. And since then, we've seen in Perth and Brisbane about a 6% nominal fall, so about a 9 or 10% real fall, which is a very substantial drop for property. And in Melbourne, there's been about a 6% fall real terms, and Sydney's remained reasonably steady. So we've seen certainly the cream come off property, but what that creates is a changing mindset. So at the moment, since about 96, 97, we've had a view from almost universal that property doesn't fall. So people will buy property on yields of 2 and 3% in the expectation that you'll get capital gains. And this is furthered by the negative gearing regime. But when you change that mindset from property going up 5%, 10% every year to suddenly not only staying steady but perhaps dropping, suddenly people completely realign their expectations. So that means that instead of accepting a 2 and 3% yield, people will want a 5, 6, 7% yield from property. So on that basis, you can see a 40 to 50% price drop without all that much difficulty over a period of time.
It's interesting because you have got differing views on this. We are starting to see more concern about the property bubble. I won't get you to put a time limit on that one either. Are you more concerned about the Chinese property bubble bursting or ours?
Oh, I think they'll both burst. China's a bit more difficult because the economy and the market isn't as open, isn't as transparent. In Australia, there's far more transparency and much greater free press. So much like what happened in the US and Ireland, there'll be a quicker, whilst property's slow moving in general, there will be a quicker onset than in China, which is a bit more hazy. But if you look at the Australian situation, it's really not that different to the US in 06, 07 or Ireland in 07, 08. We've got a... Sorry, Janine.
No, that's all right. I was just going to move on just before we run out of time. You are the author of the famous book about executive pay excess. Now it's in the trough. While you're away, a bit of a controversy here on Alan Joyce getting a big pay package when share price is down. He's talking the whole airline down. Does it prove we haven't learned anything? We're still in the same problem we were about executive pay?
Well, there's almost a new generation of snouts at the trough, or pigs at the trough. Not quite to the same extent. I wrote extensively on Jeff Dixon when he was CEO of Qantas, and Jeff was actually the highest paid airline CEO in the world in cash terms, despite Qantas underperforming the MSCI airline index. So Alan Joyce, I actually have a soft spot for Alan Joyce. I think he's actually quite a good CEO, and he gets a bad rap, but I don't mind him. The pay rise, for any airline pay rise, is always going to be shrouded in controversy because part of Alan Joyce's job is to make sure that the airline's employees aren't paid very well. And if he's doing a good job in that regard, he'll get a pay rise himself. Admittedly, 2 million of his 5 million was in shares, but he'll get a pay rise himself. And understandably, the airline employees will be somewhat aggrieved for him being rewarded for reducing their pay. So there's always that dichotomy.
Aggrieved is putting it mildly, Adam.
Very true. But I think if you look at the Joyce instance, certainly won't be the worst executive pay we'll see. It certainly pales in comparison to the likes of Wal King and
so
Rupert
we'll
Murdoch.
we'll have something to look forward to, and we'll pick that up with you on our next outing. Nice to see you back and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, Jane.